A lot of Russians don't want to fight in Ukraine, so thousands are fleeing to the U.S. Many end up crossing the U.S. southern border. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a disaster. They were unprepared for a long war, and they've been crippled by corruption and bad logistics. Their forces continue to see massive casualties. Since the start of its invasion last year, it's estimated that more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been wounded or killed. Ukraine says that's 100,000 just among the dead, with even more injured. If true, that would be double the U.S.'s losses in Vietnam in 1/10 of the time. Not exactly an attractive situation to be in for Russian soldiers. But Russian leader Vladimir Putin insists on continuing what he started. In September, Putin ordered a partial military mobilization to get 300,000 troops on the battlefield. But for a lot of them, it's a death sentence, especially for those who are old, sick, or lack training. People are given only a few weeks or even just days of training before being deployed as cannon fodder, especially ethnic minorities. If Ukrainians don't kill them, their own Russian comrades might, either by accident or on purpose. Russians also risk freezing to death from the winter season. Death is so likely that Russia's even offering to freeze soldiers' semen in case they die. The program is specifically geared toward married couples whose husbands have been called up as part of the mobilization order. Nothing says just in case more than married men storing their sperm for their wives. With Russia facing a demographic crisis, can't say I blame them. But it's certainly not reassuring. Thousands of Russians, especially able-bodied men, have been fleeing and seeking refuge abroad. But their options are limited. Many European countries are against letting Russians in, citing migration and security concerns. Many Russians end up in countries like Germany, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But some are fleeing to the U.S., and they're getting here by crossing the southern border. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. Thousands of Russians are fleeing their country to avoid fighting in Ukraine. And some are fleeing to the U.S., including two guys who sailed a small boat from Russia to a remote Alaskan island. But most Russians are going to the U.S. southern border from Mexico. They enter Mexico as tourists because they don't need a visa, and then travel to the U.S. border. At first, the U.S. was prioritizing Ukrainians who were taking this route. But after Putin's military mobilization, the White House said it welcomed Russians seeking asylum too.
We have been clear to distinguish between the actions of the Russian government and its armed forces in Ukraine and the Russian people, many of whom have spoken out against this unjust war. So anyone seeking refuge for persecution, regardless of their nationality, may apply for asylum in the United States and have their claim adjudicated on a case-by-case basis.
Some are coming to the U.S. border thanking President Joe Biden.
This big opportunity, like receive the political asylum in the United States. Thank you, Joseph Biden, for this opportunity. God bless you. God bless USA.
We came for asking political asylum. Yeah. Because in our country is a bad situation. It's problem in country after starting war between Ukraine for politically and for religious, actually for Muslims and majority of nations like from Caucasus, Muslim, Russian government sent first of for war for us.
Throughout 2022, the U.S. saw a 50-fold surge in Russian asylum seekers. The New York Times reports that over 21,000 Russians were processed by U.S. authorities at the southern border, compared with 467 in 2020. According to the New York Post, there's been more than 31,000 Russians crossing the southern border to seek political asylum since the outbreak of the war. But they're getting very different treatment from other people caught illegally crossing the southern border. Currently, most illegal immigrants are expelled under Title 42. That's the Trump-era policy that expelled migrants, including asylum seekers, on the grounds of preventing COVID. But the Biden administration has gone out of its way to get some Russians into the country, actually bypassing Title 42. U.S. Customs recently announced that it's allowing more Russians to enter the United States with Title 42 exemptions. Basically, they've been using the pre-Title 42 policy, Title 8. That's what was traditionally used by U.S. Customs to handle migrants before Trump invoked Title 42. Under Title 8, migrants can request political asylum, and immigration officials have the discretion to allow migrants to remain in the country without being detained as their asylum cases are pending. But even if they're not immediately expelled, Russian asylum seekers don't have it easy. Many asylum seekers are released and allowed to argue their cases later in court. But thousands are sent to detention centers, where it is difficult to secure lawyers and collect evidence, and the chances of winning asylum are extremely slim. Nevertheless, for many, it sure beats dying in Ukraine. So what do you think about Russians fleeing to the southern border? Leave your comments below. And if you like this show, remember that we rely mainly on direct support from viewers like you. All it takes is as little as $1 per episode over on our crowdfunding website, Patreon. It's patreon.com/America Uncovered for more. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.